Hey everybody, welcome to Woolfer TV. I'm Hillary Richard, and today I'm interviewing author Lydia Millet about her novel, her most recent novel, A Children's Bible. It's fabulous. She's an incredibly talented and quite prolific author. She's written close to 20 works of fiction. She won the Penn USA Award for her 2003 novel, My Happy Life. In 2010, she was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her short story collection, Love and Infant Monkeys. She won a Guggenheim in 2012, and also in 2012, her book Magnificence was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist and a Los Angeles Times Book Award finalist. In 2019, she received the Award of Merit for short stories from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And in 2020, her new book, A Children's Bible, which is what we're going to talk about today, was published. It too has been winning awards. It's a National Book Awards finalist for fiction. It was named one of the New York Times 10 best books of the year and one of the best novels of the year by Time, Washington Post, NPR, Esquire, BBC, tons of other folks, including myself, Hillary Richard, clearly the least prestigious name on that list. And it's a fantastic book. It's really funny, it's dark, it's frighteningly prophetic, and it's just stunning. So I want you to know that when I finished reading it and I went to my notes to prepare for this interview, I literally wrote one word and it was wow, just wow. I mean, I subsequently wrote some more stuff, but that was my immediate impression. So welcome, Lydia. It's such an honor to have you here with us today. How you doing?
It's really fun to be here. I think, I think my head's getting a little big after you saying all those stuff about,
It's not my fault. It's a long list. Stop winning stuff.
well,
Well, so obviously you're an impressive writer. Anyone who's read any of your work knows that. And certainly after my introduction, they'd know it if they hadn't. But putting the list of accolades aside, there's something else about you that I find totally fascinating, and it's really relevant to a children's Bible. And I sort of wanted to talk about it before we got into the sort of meat of your book. And that is you have a master's degree in environmental policy, and you work for the nonprofit Center for Biological Diversity. Now, that's really not your garden variety path for a fiction writer. So I'm wondering what inspired you to get that master's?
well, it is kind of well, I don't know. I'm just going to give you the short version of the story and hope not to bore you into, some kind of soporific state. Basically, I was in my early 20s, right out of college, went to LA and ended up without a job and having to take various less than ideal jobs. And one of those was as the copy editor of Hustler magazine. Okay.
I love this part of your resume, by the way. You're not going to bore anyone, so please go through it.
This is where I fended against all women. But sort of essentially while I was working there, I mean, there are other stories from working there that that if anyone wants me to, and if we're doing a Q&A, are we doing a Q&A? They can ask me then. Anyway, it's too sordid for me to just volunteer. But essentially, I decided I wanted to work in conservation, and all I had on my resume was like porn and guns. And so I decided I needed maybe some academic qualifications or something. So I went to Duke to study conservation, essentially, although I ended up doing this really dry degree that was called it was like a resource economics and policy or something like that. I wish I'd done something better, like resource ecology or something, because they got to study actual animals. And I just did like cost benefit analysis and supply and demand curves and stuff. Yeah. And then after that was when I moved to New York and spent a couple of years there. And then I moved to Arizona to work for the group I still work for now. So that was I guess that was 21 years ago, actually. Because I just love the sort of bunch of, at that time, kind of ex-Earth First kind of activists There was a
Well,
small group at the time. They were just doing this kind of, as they called it, sort of shit kicking work. And I thought so too. I just really loved what they were doing. Sort of a no compromise kind of thing. Lots of work under the Endangered Species Act, and now a lot of work on climate change too. So I'm just an editor there. I'm just a a peon basically, which I like. I like that. I like editing. I like copy editing. I like correcting typos and getting to be really anal about grammar. And I really love my work there actually. But I've been passionate about that stuff, about keeping things from going extinct and preserving wild places and stuff for a long time, really, since in one way or another since I was a kid. So that was a really long answer. Sorry.
it was a great answer, and good for you. It's funny. I really applaud people who are trying to help stop the, endangered species and trying to fight against climate change. I texted a good friend of mine yesterday and I was like, do you have a second to talk? And she was like, I'm on a very long call about saving the whales. And I was like, okay, clearly more important than gossiping with me. Please just call me after you've saved a couple of whales. Yeah. Well, your love for animals and for the earth certainly shines through in this book. So I want to talk a little bit about A Children's Bible. I read it without having read any of the reviews or the publisher's, tear sheet or any information. I like to just go in cold. So just for those of you out here who haven't yet had the pleasure of reading this incredible novel, stunning novel, the book opens. We meet a group of kids. They're mostly teenagers. There are a couple of younger siblings. They're spending the summer in this super posh lake house built by a robber baron on the shores of a lake with their parents who are reuniting with their college friends. The kids don't know each other, right? They're meeting for the first time. You obviously, Lydia, know all of this. The parents are horrible. They're drunk. They're negligent. They're buffoons. They're physically unattractive, at least by the narration. The kids avoid them as best they can. Now at this point, and it's funny, you're funny as shit. I'm loving it. The way that they slap on the parents is just so brilliant. Even though I'm sure there are teenagers saying these kinds of things about me out in the universe somewhere. And at this point, I really think, because I don't know anything about the book. 21st century Lord of the Flies. This is where we're going. Kids are going to peel off. They're going to turn on each other. And then there's a big storm coming. And this is when the kids go off to the beach. And I'm thinking this is going to be Lord of the Flies, 21st century version. But then there's this giant storm and the book takes a turn, certainly that I didn't anticipate. And it's only then, right, afterwards that I realized that this is really a book about climate change. And I'm wondering, was that your intention, or am I slow as shit and, need to get a different job?
I did intend to trick you.
Okay.
Personally, on a personal level, I intended to sort of gaslight you. I always, with this particular book, I did set out to write about climate from the beginning, because because I'm interested in the anger, and you've probably heard me say this elsewhere, or maybe in that thing with Darcy, but just sort of interested in the anger of kids at my generation, people like me, and I fear I bear too strong a resemblance to some of the parents you described in somewhat unfavorable terms, but I agree. So where was I? I can't hear you, actually. Oh, there you are.
You were telling me that you tricked me intentionally.
Yes, I tricked you. So I always, yes, I did want to trick you. I did want to sort of have this kind of idol at the beginning of the book, partly selfishly because I like to sort of exist in the idol at the beginning of a book as I'm writing it. I like to start in sort of like a an Eden-like kind of place, just because it's,
Yeah,
it's pleasant to be there.
like the biblical reference to the Eden. I
Yeah.
like.
Oh, well, yeah, Eden. It's all about, the garden and stuff and the expulsion. And but I like that as a reader. I like to first situate myself in some form of, I don't know, something beautiful, some landscape, or not usually a physical landscape in my writing. I'm not too descriptive of landscape or anything like that, but like in a sort of happy place to start. And then yeah, the just sort of chaos, and the falling apart, and the resentment of the kids for their parents, my sort of passive generation that missed its chance to do much.
I
And I guess,
often, yeah,
the generation of most Woolfer
yeah.
folks, probably, I guess.
Our
Generation,
demographic.
yeah.
I often wonder, how differently we would be situated if Al Gore's, if Al Gore had been elected. Obviously he's somebody who cares very deeply about climate change. That election had
Yeah,
the voting been allowed to continue and not been stopped by the Supreme Court in a
I
very
know.
blatantly political decision. I wonder often where we would be. I mean, not that that gets us anywhere, but
I know
uh,
those counterfactuals can be really enraging and frustrating, especially if you look at just the electoral college, the history of the college and how it stymied us. And yeah, that vote recount being stopped, what would have gone differently? Maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe he didn't win or wouldn't have,
oh,
right?
I think he would have won if the votes would have continued, but um,
Although I have to say that I was once driven by, like, I think it was a taxi, some kind of ride for hire, something, by a guy who had been kind of like a celebrity. I don't want to say escort because that implies, sexual favors or whatever. He'd been like one of those people who drive celebrities around, right?
okay.
And he had driven both. This was not long after that election. He'd driven both Dan Quayle, I guess, at a certain moment, and Al Gore. And he told me, and the guy was kind of he was kind of a socialist type
Sure.
working guy, the driver and stuff. And he told me that, yeah, he liked Gore's politics and was disgusted by Dan Quayle's, but that Dan Quayle was just the nicest, sweetest guy in
Huh.
his car. And Al Gore was a real patrician asshole. So anyway, just a little anecdote.
It's so funny because you say Dan Quill, who's thought of that guy in a million years, and all I think of is dumb as a post.
Oh
Like
yeah, no, I
that,
think that's probably true.
yeah.
Yeah, it's probably, but you can be sweet and dumb, right? I mean,
Oh, sure. I mean, it's probably easier to be honest.
definitely.
So I loved the collective of the kids, I loved the way that it really turned out to be the antithesis of the Lord of the Flies, right? So instead of turning on each other, they band together and each of them brings like a particular skill or a talent, and you know they act together in furtherance of the collective. And I loved that. And I wonder, are the kids going to save us from ourselves? Are they going to save the planet? Are we, me, you, the people who are listening, are we those parents? I mean, yeah, you think?
I mean, I think the children might actually do that if they had time, but they don't actually have time. So, it's got to be us, right? It's
Yeah.
got to be those dissolute, selfish characters that, in whose number I count myself.
I have to say, it was a pretty eye-opening portrait. Like, it's one thing, the hedonism, the alcoholism, I could take all of that, but when you started with the physical descriptions of them naked, I was just really hard.
You mean like the one where the girl's looking at her mother's bikini nipples or something? That one?
So awful. Oh my God. Well, so back to the book. Enough about us, our bloated comic selves who haven't done enough to fight climate change. But so the book's called a children's Bible. The narrator's name is Eve. There's a plague. There's some saving of animals. there's a plague, there's literally a birth in a barn, there's some wise people. I mean, all of this, all sort of woven together with the framework being the children's Bible. And if you didn't know better, while you're reading it, you'd think it was about religion. And then you read it and it turns out really to be an ode, a love poem to science. And I'm wondering, and I love that because I love science, even though I don't understand it at all, but I fully believe in it. And I believe in scientists, and feel that everyone who's a scientist knows better than I do. But I'm wondering, where did you get the idea to use the children's Bible as the framework for the whole novel? Because it worked so beautifully. It was brilliant, I thought.
Well, when you listed all those plot points and stuff, I actually thought, oh, that makes it sound pretty derivative, But actually, I really wanted to. I'm always sort of seeking, not framing devices, but sort of structures or sort of metaphorical or skeletal or symbolic structures for the plots of my books, because I'm not really that interested in plot, and so I'm just much more interested in like voice and tone and humor and maybe character as like a vehicle for those things, really. And and feeling and like empathy and sort of rushes of the ecstatic. I'm interested in sort of constructing this sort of rapturous ecstasy as I get to the end of a book. But I'm not interested in really events except insofar as they further those things. And so really, the Bible, the children's Bibles that I saw when I was a kid, although I lived in a secular home, but my mother had been raised in Georgia in a home with plenty of old like 50s Bible stories and stuff that I saw when we'd go there in summers when I was growing up. These old kind of ratty pastel colored kind of illustrated Bibles for kids. And
I went to Catholic school. I totally get it.
Okay, yeah. And I just, first of all, I love the sort of aesthetics of some of them. And then also I love how they always seem to have their greatest hits, the greatest hits of the Bible for kids, which never included the book of Revelation,
right?
Obviously, right? And although
in the room, I think, right?
What?
I said we would have all gone screaming from the room.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, they knew it would not. Yeah, it's like the equivalent of, Grand Theft Auto or something like that for the young mind, right? But that's probably a really dated reference now. Like, do they even play GTA anymore? Yeah. Let's see. So first, it was just sort of like evocative to me, these idea of these children's Bible stories, and second, it gave me a vague structure, to sort of impressionistic structure for some of the small things that happen in the book. But it certainly isn't meant to be any kind of literal, you can't map it onto the.
It didn't come off like that. And it certainly didn't come off as derivative. I thought it was really clever because I saw it as like this way for Jack, who's, for those of you listening, Evie's little brother, who is given this children's Bible. And he's sort of he spends the book trying to decode it. Like, he doesn't take it at all literally. And it's interesting because the week before I read it, I was standing in line at a COVID testing place with my 15-year-old daughter, and our weekly routine. And we were talking about politics, and we were talking about the religious right. And she was like, "Mom, why did all these people like read the Bible and believe in God? Like, I don't get it." And we were, just having sort of a free-ranging conversation about it. And I was like, look, I don't think anyone should take it literally. I mean, it's a metaphor. You should see it as a metaphor. And really the only message you should take from the Bible, in my opinion, and I did go to Catholic school, I was raised a Catholic the whole nine yards, is, you need to be kind to other people. You should feed the hungry, help the poor, help those less fortunate than you. And the rest of it is just like a lot of bullshit. Yeah, blather. Anyway, it's my personal theology right here for all of you Woolfers. So when in the book, and I don't think I'm giving anything away because I think reviewers have talked about this, right? Is that
no worries anyway? I'm not worried about that.
Okay. So when Jack's sort of trying to decode this book, and obviously his family's an atheist because he doesn't have any idea what this crap's about. He looks at the Holy Trinity and he sees God as nature, Jesus as science, and the Holy Ghost is like making things, I think. And I was just all in on that. To me, that is so right. That is so right. And when he's saying, like, look, this is how you know, science heals, Jesus heals. Jesus makes the blind see, science makes the blind see. I'm a blind person who had cataract surgery. So like, I'm like, yes, I think science did that. It was not Jesus.
Right.
I'm wondering, do you actually believe this? And how do we how do we get other people to go there?
Yeah, I actually do, in the sense that I really think, I really think that the sort of the schism that exists in the culture now here in the US between, literalist readings of Christianity and science is really.
Wait, we lost you. Come back to us, Lydia.
Yeah.
Wait, we lost you. Can you go back to after the schism part?
Oh, I see. So I'm back. Okay. So before the schism, right? So yeah. So I think it's very unfortunate for us that this sort of division has been allowed to kind of split the country apart in these culture wars that we now have, and which really are just wreaking havoc, not only on our culture but really on the world. and it's so unnecessary that there be a conflict between science and faith, and there really isn't a conflict between science and faith, except
No.
when people decide to deny metaphor. It's when it's in the denial of metaphor that sort of tragedy comes to pass, the sort of literal readings of scripture. And so anyways, I'm always interested in trying to sort of parse that, if that answers your question.
Well, I think you, through Jack, did a great job parsing it in this book, which is, I just loved how funny it was too, even when parts of it were so dark, and you're realizing, like, oh my God, is this our future? But the wit never left, which is something I personally really appreciated it. Now I have to ask you something. So
Too.
have a lot of time left, but I couldn't help but notice in the acknowledgments that you thanked your reader, Jenny Offill. And then I looked at the back of the book to see some of the praise, pretty mighty praise that you got, not only from Jenny Offill, but also from
Yes.
Karen.
Yes.
And I reviewed both Weather and Orange World for the Woolfer's newsletter. And both of those books are also about climate change. So now I'm wondering, is there like a cabal of really talented female writers who care about and write about climate change? And if so, who else is in there other than you three?
That I like the cabal. That's a good idea. Cabal. Yeah. No, I wish I'd been that ambitious. Maybe I'll start a cabal now.
Well, I think you already have one, whether or not you named it.
Well, so Jenny's been my friend since college, really. And my very close friend. And of course I was working on these matters long before she was even interested in them, as she always admits quickly, when we talk to people together and stuff about these particular books. But she then became really sort of a convert to a really quite obsessive person who read the science of climate change and became really sort of transfixed by prepperdom and other aspects of the culture confronting that.
And Weather, like.
Yeah, and it's a lovely book. I think it's great. All her writing's great. But so it just was sort of a coincidence that I finally was writing I actually finished this book maybe a year or two before Weather was finished,
Mm.
but I don't think she'd read it or anything. So we didn't actually talk to each other much about these particular books while we were doing them. And they're quite different, right? They really address different
Very different.
kind of aspects of
You're
the
writing
culture
style.
around this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both great books.
Yeah.
Anyone
It is really different.
should. And by the way, I just want to say that anyone who hasn't read this book already should really read it. It's such a pleasure, and I think it's important too. It's important reading. So I think, what is it called? Bookshop.org. Is that the indie bookshop site?
Yeah, that's right.
That's where people should get it, or write at their own independent bookstore. So what's next for you? I mean, you feel like you're writing all the damn time.
Yeah, I'm writing actually a nonfiction book right now, which I've written a lot of nonfiction in short form, like, essays and columns and things like that in the past, but not a whole book. But I needed a change. I needed to write something different. And so it's a thing about extinction and religion. Actually, some of the things you and I just touched on, and about sort of our love for the wild and for critters, and but also just sort of intermittently about episodes in my own life that sort of, so it's kind of it's called it's a bestiary, so it's in the form of a bestiary.
Okay, interesting, because I know you're not a fan of the memoir. I've read that about you.
Well, it depends on, there's some great memoirs out there, but yeah, there are also some really solipsistic ones, as I'm sure you know. But there are memoirs that I love, like, Lucy Greeley's autobiography of a face, or William Styron's, Darkness Visible. There's a lot of great memoirs out there. Yeah, but just, yeah, right. It's hard to find the good ones sometimes.
There are a mountain of them, but I do. Yes, there are some fabulous ones. Well, I'm sorry we don't have more time, because I could pretty much just waste your afternoon, but I know you just got back from work, and I'm supposed to keep this to about a half an hour. So I look forward to your bestiary, and I encourage everyone to get the book. And I just want to say really thank you for coming on and talking to our folks. Just so you know, we don't usually get a lot of questions while we're doing this, because it mostly gets viewed after the fact, not live.
Oh, right.
So I'm sure it'll generate a lot of chatter, but after the fact. So
okay, that is fine. That is just fine.
So thank you so much, Lydia. And I feel like we're pals now.
We're totally pals. We're totally pals. Come to my house anytime, as long as you bring something to drink.
I think I can do that.